G'day, Stephen. Welcome to the MGF 5991 studio.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time today. Let's get straight into it. So, do you mind starting by telling us a little bit about your career background to date?
Yep. I actually lived in the southeast suburbs. I went to Monash Uni in Clayton.
Yep.
I did an economics degree with a major in accounting and some management. I then went and worked at May Nicholas, which was a third-party logistics company who are no more, and I was the fixed assets controller. So I worked in the corporate accounting services. So I ran a department which looked after all the fixed assets, all the trucks and fixed assets of the organisation. Yep. I did that for 2 years. Realised I didn't want to be an accountant and thought that I'd be more interested in operational type areas. Yep. I went overseas for a couple of years. I came back and then applied for a national management trainee role within May Nicholas again. Yep. And I ended up working out in the eastern suburbs at BHP Building Products, which is now part of BlueScope Steel. And I was the on-site transport manager of a group of 30 May Nicholas trucks and about 20 to 30 subcontractors on a daily basis, and we were managing the delivery of BHP Building Products, which is the colour bond, out to residential sites throughout Victoria.
Right, okay.
I did that for a couple of years. Yep. I then went and joined a transport consulting business, and I worked there for 2 years. I then got a job with another transport or logistics consulting business in the private sector.
Yep. And
that role turned into the formation of a business that was called Logistics Benchmarking Service back then. Today it's still called Benchmarking Success. That was a joint venture between RMIT and Henderson Consultants.
Right.
So I pioneered a new business which was to enable the corporate world and others to be able to benchmark their supply chain performance. Both from a technical but also from a human relational perspective, and we ran advanced learning groups for the corporate world, and I did that until 2004, so about 10 years. And in the last 10 years I've joined Mirror, which is an organisational development business who works with the development of an organisation in a healthy way, where people are the core asset to the organisation, and the organisation is managed congruent with that philosophy.
Right.
And that led me into working with a client and writing a book. And so since the last 12 months, I'm working under a banner of Collaborative Inquiry, which is working in that collaborative space.
Excellent. So I didn't know that's how you actually met Ian George, who you co-authored that book, From Me to We, Design and Build Collaborative Workplaces.
Yeah, so Ian and I were both participants in the course.
Right.
And he was running a boutique integrated development organisation that sort of found land, built property and then sold them. So we did a 4 to 5 year project whereby he decided not to tender, which was quite radical. So 80% of the spend of building went to a group of contractors who no longer tendered, who became part of an inner circle. And he wanted to create this concept that probably existed 100 years ago of the master builder who had all the trades.
Yep.
That project went on for 5 years. He did it because he was heading into a bull market and thought he wouldn't be able to find his contractors.
Okay.
And that allowed him to build a strong relationship with his contractors very successfully. He ended up cutting about 7% of his total costs in building through this strategic planning process and not tendering. So some of the contractors reduced their prices about 25% over the 5 years. So major success.
Building trust.
Building trust.
Yeah, excellent. Do you mind talking a little bit about the book and some of the ideas in your book?
So it would be fair to say that when we started, we didn't know the solution. Ian had a view that if people work together and they trust each other, you get better outcomes. But they were concerned about whether, if there was no tendering, what would keep the supplier or contractor sharp. And the lowest
Fair.
price and fair. We didn't know at that time whether that would be the right answer, but we sensed that if people are treated well, they'll do their best. And so we had 7 of those contractors who were told they would get ongoing work, which as a supplier, that's lovely news because they don't have to go out and market and go through that tender process, which is predominantly unproductive.
Yep.
They might win 1 in 5, but they've got to spend hundreds of hours and they don't get paid for that.
Sure.
So then they have to top load the ones that they do get. Construction industry is full of making your money through variances, often via the courts. It's a relatively hostile environment. Ian wanted to change all that.
Yep.
And not have variances.
Yep.
And have everything done up front. So what we did was, for them coming in and with no tenders,
Yep.
what they had to give in return was their intellectual property early on in the cycle. So normally what happens is a contractor bids when the plan is done, the concept plan is done.
Right.
Whereas what they were asked to do was work with the architect and the engineer to build the plans and build the drawings.
Okay.
So then there would be a budget done of building. So in contrast, they used to build from an unsighted plan.
Right.
Now they were building from a plan they created.
Yep.
And not surprisingly, the construction process went incredibly well and efficiently and effectively without any issues and faster than we had programmed.
Right. Sort of skin in the game.
Yeah, so everyone had skin in the game.
Yeah.
And it changed, the philosophy was, rather than you working for yourself and trying to make your profit without regard for anybody else, we'll create an environment where the team will be successful and we will work with each other and be conscious of we.
Yep.
So if we all do the right thing, we'll all benefit, and that's what actually happened over a 5-year process. To the degree that the contractors saw themselves still working for the builder, but they also saw responsibility for fellow contractors, because if they promised, so the one rule in the project was, if you make a promise, you must keep it, and if you can't keep it, you have to go back and renegotiate that promise with that contractor.
Okay.
So therefore what happened was a very high trust environment.
Yep.
Most of the duplication and waste disappeared, and that's why some of them reduced their price over that 5-year period by up to 25%, but they made more profit.
Wow.
So their businesses grew, they made more profit, but they were charging less to the builder, who then was constructing at a cheaper price up to about 7%. So it was about, if we had a $100 million spend, it was a $7 million spend for the builder.
Wow.
And the supplier got the benefit of 5 years' work. The builder didn't get that benefit in the first project, only the suppliers did. But then when they priced the next project, they priced at a lower level than they had done the first time, because now the waste was gone.
Right.
And so that was quite and lots of performance management, lots of feedback systems, lots of things that we're here to talk about were part of what happened in the book.
Yeah, excellent. So that's what I was hoping to sort of lead into now, is perhaps how some of the ideas in your book can give us insights about effective performance review meetings or sessions, and what are the characteristics of effective performance review meetings?
So, I thought to myself, performance management actually is part of the feedback systems in an organisation.
Yep.
So wherever we work, there are feedback systems that come from customers into us, from suppliers into us, irrespective of the organisation we're working in, whether it's a product or service-based organisation.
Yep.
So feedback is what we get that allows us to adjust our actions, behaviours, processes, plans, so they're aligned to customer requirements.
Yep.
So it's, for it to be at its best, it needs to be dynamic and fluid. So within that, individual performance reviews, traditionally they're once a year.
Yep.
They're moments where you typically talk to your superior, your boss, who may or may not have a formal process, may or may not have a formal evaluation process that I fill in as the employer, you fill in as the boss.
Right.
But if it is formal, then you fill out your perspectives of how I've gone.
Yep.
I fill out my perspectives how I've gone. And so that provides feedback for both of us when we sit down. We might sit down for an hour. Yep. Hopefully you've done your work, I've done my work. We come to have a productive conversation about how I can improve my performance.
Yep.
And I would argue that's the most important hour of my life in that year.
Okay.
Because if I get good feedback from a superior who's my boss, who I know well, I get an idea of whether I'm going forward, whether I've got a promotion coming up,
right,
or whether I've got a demotion and not a development step.
Right.
But I should also, if that performance review goes well, have a strong sense of what things I need to work on in my development. So I may have learnt a range of technical skills in my course,
right,
but I now need to apply those in a day-to-day basis. I need to work with a group of people. I need to collaborate with some.
Yep.
I need to be self-driven, have initiative. So all those things hopefully will be part of a productive performance review. Now,
Yep. Yep.
it's fair to say that not every organisation has performance reviews. Sometimes they happen when we've got a chance.
Yep.
Sometimes they don't happen. Normally an organisation gets to, I don't know, maybe over 50 people. It then can become more formalised and structured. You
Right.
might have a HR department. You might have someone helping the managers do performance reviews.
Right.
Performance reviews often are difficult for management because they have to say hard things.
Right.
They'll often avoid saying those directly.
Yep.
So you have to do a lot of education within the company to conduct a healthy performance review that's productive for me and for you.
Yep.
So that gives you a sense in terms of characteristics. As I said, performance review is part of the feedback. I think as part of the characteristics, we need every performance review to be linked to the strategic objectives of the organisation.
Yep.
And then the operating plan that's valid for that 12 months. So I should be able to link my performance with the success of my area or department.
Yep.
And I should be able to see the link between my area and the organisational performance.
Sure.
So in good organisations, they have a direct alignment process from the top,
Sure.
from the board, down to the senior management team, down to departmental areas, and then down the departments.
Individual employees. Yeah.
And so a good performance review process is that I can see my input and how it impacts on the success of the organisation,
Excellent.
which should make the foundation stones that I'm standing on strong, because I know what I've done to make my area successful and what
Yep.
my area has done to make the organisation successful. A performance review should be fair and it should be objective.
Okay.
So that means that it shouldn't be personality based.
Okay.
There should be some structure to it, in that me as the person being reviewed should understand what you, my boss, is looking for. So that's where that idea of a formal evaluation process comes in.
Yep.
A good performance review shouldn't have any surprises about the past, which means that, let's say I've made an error, I would expect to get feedback about that error straight away.
Right.
Because then I could fix up or develop or uncover that blind spot that I had, see the consequences of my actions the next day. So by the time I get to a performance review, I shouldn't be learning of things that I did over that 12 months. I should have already known about them.
Yep.
So therefore, that makes the performance review not of one of surprise,
Right.
but one of development.
Yes. Okay.
So if it's not about if I've had no feedback over the past year, then it can be a very nerve-wracking experience, the
Right.
performance review, especially if you know that there's no structure and you don't get on with your boss.
Right. Okay. Yep.
So in a more developed organisation, personality shouldn't be part of it, but we're human beings, so it tends to be. So the other aspect that I briefly mentioned is the other characteristic is that performance review should be about development and the future. So what do I need to do next year to build my competency, knowledge, skills that allow me to take the next step in my development path and my career.
Right.
and obviously that depends on what I'm interested in, and you as my boss I hope, asks me, you might do that in the recruitment process, but also ongoing. Every performance review should check in with where I think I'm going. You need to tell me where I'm going is valid and appropriate.
Yep.
And if it's not, what things I need to work on to enable me to get back on that track that I'm pursuing.
Okay.
And I suppose in that sense, our feedback needs to be timely.
Yep.
Performance review needs to be timely. As I said, I think it's the most important hour in my year.
Yep.
That means that my boss needs to be prepared. So there's nothing worse than me thinking I'm going to have an hour of focused attention and it turns into 10 minutes.
Right.
And I'm not seen.
Right. Right.
So that's an example of a demoralising performance review.
Yep.
So the idea as a construct is we need things that energise the system. We need things that energise me. I think that a motivated person is always more productive.
Yep.
So therefore, if I'm the manager doing a performance review, I need to have done my homework. I need to know what I need to know to help you make that development step. And it needs to be delivered in a balance that says, so number one, our relationship needs to be good to enable us to have that conversation.
Yep.
So that's my first responsibility, to build that connection.
Yes.
The second one is that if I've got hard things to say, I should mix those with what I call sugar and salt. So what are the things I've done well? And then what are some of the things that I could do better?
Yep.
So then I go out energised to be better in the subsequent period.
Sure.
And I've got a strong sense of what I've done well, and I've got a strong sense of what some of my weaknesses are, and hopefully the manager helps me build up those weaknesses into strengths so they don't stop me from my development.
Yep.
So that's a sense of a performance review.
Excellent. Excellent.
Obviously, it depends on the culture of the organisation.
Yep.
And perhaps just to briefly talk about that, human synergistics there are many, many different versions of types of cultures. Human synergistics talk about three types. One is constructive, one is passive defensive, and one is defensive aggressive. And in those three cultures, performance reviews probably follow the culture of the business. So if it's a defensive, if it's a passive aggressive organisation, they're into not rocking the boat.
Yep.
So that means we'll have a very pleasant, polite performance review.
Right.
But we won't name the hard issues.
Yep.
We'll gloss over them.
Yep.
Me as the boss won't ask you how I've performed as your boss.
Right.
And you as the employee won't challenge me as the boss.
Right.
So it will be polite. We might not get as much out of it as we could.
Right.
But we don't want to rock the boat because that's the culture. So there are organisations that tend not to be innovative. They tend to not come up with good ideas. It tends to be top down. In contrast, the aggressive defensive organisation is one where it's hostile.
Yep.
So our performance review might be conflict laden. It could be aggressive. If I'm the boss, I tell you what you need to do. You don't say a word.
Yep.
So I'm there belting you around the ears.
Right.
So the third option is a constructive culture, which is we're clear that we pursue excellence.
Yep.
In an open and transparent way. So in that environment, I will ask you as the manager what you could do better to help me, and vice versa. So it's a two-way conversation.
Right.
It's feedback up and down and across. So it's a very healthy process, very respectful.
Right.
So within those environments, depending on, so when you're taking your first job, be careful where you join, because the culture, know as much as you can about the culture, because that will impact on your career path and how you might get somewhere.
Excellent. Yeah. And that's actually very insightful, especially for me as well, this idea of culture influencing how performance management and performance reviews are carried out. And I'm sure that's very insightful for our students as well. So just sort of following on from that, some of the ideas in your book relate to collaborative approaches in workplaces.
Yes.
And perhaps linking it with the idea of the constructive collaborative workplace cultures. what sort of things can managers do in a performance review
Yep.
meeting or preparation to be more collaborative?
Yep. So in a collaborative environment, we tend to break or expand on the relationship we have with work colleagues, with bosses, in that they tend to be less hierarchical.
Yep.
So we can speak to anybody.
Okay.
And they tend to be environments where we get to know each other. So I talk about this idea that we often have to wear a professional mask at work.
Yep.
And we have to be that person or be that role.
Right.
And who we are as a person can get left behind. Whereas in a collaborative environment, we tend to break down that professional mask and ask people to bring their whole self to work, which then means that things that are going on in our lives, we all know affect us at work.
Yep.
So whether we've got young children at home who have been up all night, whether we've got relationship challenges, whether we've got any aspect of life comes into our work and vice versa.
Yep.
So, I use an approach when I start a meeting and I ask, how much of you is here today? And typically people smile, but then they see that I'm asking a question about themselves and their life. And if they've had a hard night with their children being up all night, they're probably not going to be the sharpest at that meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning. But tomorrow, they might have had a great night's sleep and they'll be the sharpest person. So what we're doing is embracing the wholeness of the human being in the workplace and working with people's strengths and weaknesses. So that's part of it. And I would say there's a certain soulfulness about that. So we're treating people like human beings, not machines who have to pretend to be 100% all the time. The other collaborative approach is that in a collaborative environment, you tend to ask a lot of questions. And as a style of leadership and management, you tend not to tell everybody what to do.
Yep.
So as it would be in a performance review, that would be a collaborative or it would be a dialogue.
Right.
So rather than it being master-servant, master being the boss, servant being the employer, ours would be a more equal relationship where we would both ask questions and be in a conversation that would be productive for both of us.
Like a consultative sort of situation.
Yeah, like a consultative.
Yeah.
Now, and often in that collaborative essence, some of the work I do is about developing people's emotional intelligence. So most of us get our job because of our resume and our qualification, and if we can interview well.
Yep.
But if we survive at work, it's predominantly about our emotional intelligence and our social intelligence to read the organisation that we're part of and work out what the real rules are.
Yep.
Because often there are rules that are on the wall, and that's what we say we are, but what we really are is something else, and that's only by experiencing the organisation. So, an emotional intelligence, thankfully, is something that people can develop up all through their lives.
Yep.
It's interestingly said to peak at sort of 27, 28.
Okay.
But any development that we do from that period onwards then enables us to be more emotionally aware. And often what that means is that we can see what happens in any conversation, we can see what style people are using. It means that we can adjust our behaviour to fit in with who we're working with, which is a powerful dynamic when we're trying to develop high-performing environments, but also in a performance review, because if you need to know the facts, and I know you need to know the facts, then I can tell you the facts.
The way that I...
So style and emotional intelligence becomes an important thing. The other aspect about collaboration is that it's not black and white. So there's a grey area. So I always see there's a balance between the science and also the art, because there's a matter of sensing into an environment to be able to do the best. So sometimes that means pushing people harder, but sometimes it might mean allowing them to have an afternoon off to go and watch their kids play sport. Because if a motivated person is always more productive, tomorrow they'll come back and work so productively because they've been given that chance.
Right, right.
So that's where the culture and style and collaboration can play itself out. In collaborative systems, they tend to work, information travels down the organisation,
Okay.
which is what they do in a hierarchical business, where it's vertical and command and control. So collaboration still works like that, but as well, collaborative environments work, feedback goes
Bottom
up,
Yeah.
and also feedback goes across.
Okay.
So you tend to have a far more fluent environment where feedback is travelling in all directions. So therefore, it takes less time to adjust and get back on the right track in
Right.
that environment.
Better information flow.
Yeah.
Feedback.
Yep.
Yeah. Fantastic. I'm learning so much. Really. Plenty of experience and insight.
So one other thing about collaboration, I suppose, most of us think about performance reviews as a one-to-one experience.
Yep.
So I'm reviewed by my boss. But we could also have a team process review. I could be with my team members.
Yep.
My boss could be there or might not be. I could also be reviewed by, if I have direct reports, they could review me.
Right.
So that's an upward feedback process.
Yep.
And in my work, I also add another aspect, which is what I call an interphase conversation, which is every year or more frequently we do one-to-one reviews that help me on my career path.
Yep.
What I also encourage is people to do departmental reviews to see how departments are getting on with each other. Because if there are 3 departments who all do a specific bit of work for any value chain, whether it's delivering a good lecture or delivering a carton of milk or a construction site, everybody has to do their part, and typically how we interface is where the magic is.
Yep.
Because if it flows and there are no hiccups and there's no waste, then typically our interfaces are clean and flowing. So we have a conversation between departments that talk about how, I don't know, how customer service and logistics are working together.
Okay.
And that allows then the performance review, one-to-one, allows me to clean up my act.
Right.
Department reviews allow then the department to work together, because it may be that my department isn't working well. I might be doing my job. If my department's not,
Right.
then that department won't be considered as a high-performing group, even though I might be.
Yep.
So that's an expansion to the performance review, because in effect, performance reviews happen by boards of directors,
Yep.
by shareholders,
Yep.
by management teams,
Yep.
by every team in the organisation, and then supplier reviews. They're all similar things. They're all assessing the performance required versus the performance delivered,
Yep.
and then what can we do if there's a gap to improve that.
Right. Right. So it's sort of performance review at different levels, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
And obviously the personal one is the one that we're talking about, and it's the one that impacts on me mostly. But
Yep.
I might get a promotion into an organisation that's not successful,
Exactly.
so it doesn't create a career path perhaps that's the best.
Or an underperforming department might not leverage your good performance very well, or make best use of your high performance.
And I might not get opportunities outside that department for that reason.
Exactly.
Because often that cross-functional team is where I might shine.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, we've spent a bit of time talking about the performance review process from the organisation or manager's perspective. Some of our students might not have had a performance review experience so far, but they will at some point, and it's going to be a situation that's going to probably create some nerves and anxiety. In your experience, what are some of the things employees can do to manage some of the negative emotions that are associated with performance review?
So the thought that comes to mind is knowing thyself.
Okay. Yep.
So we spoke a little bit about emotional intelligence, and if we apply that to this preparation for my performance review, the more I'm aware of the actions, consequences of my actions, and how it's impacted on my work colleagues, department, organisation, the better I am at perhaps having a realistic picture of my performance.
Okay.
So that means I need to maybe prepare a picture of my successes.
Yep.
And prepare my picture of things that could have gone better, let's say, opportunities for development.
Yep.
Now, that's made easy if when I start my job, I get a job description and I have a performance agreement that says this is what success looks like. So not all organisations have that, but that's a good thing to ask for at the beginning, so you're clear of what success looks like for you. You know, and you may sit in your first week and have to design that for the client, for your employer.
Right.
So you might write a statement about and take that to your boss and say, if I do this, is that what success is?
Yep.
Yes, it is. Come back 12 months later, you evaluate yourself based on that.
Yep.
The other thing that you need to do is, I think, ask for feedback over that period of time with as many people as possible.
Okay.
So therefore, you can be well prepared for what might come in the performance review. You won't be surprised. You won't be shocked. Some people may give you helpful, constructive feedback about how you might handle yourself in certain situations.
Yep.
And then that can then help you develop your capacity, because you may be able to deliver technically your job, but it needs to be able to be communicated, and you need to engage with stakeholders that will use the output of your job.
Right.
So most of it is about understanding yourself. You also need to understand the person who'll conduct the review.
Yep.
You know, so that might be, I don't know, a personality profiling, style, the culture.
Yep.
Those, you know, think about what that person is looking for in the performance review, and be prepared, because if you make them look good, they're more likely to then see you in a very favourable light.
Okay.
If there are things that have happened that have caused that person problems or challenges, you probably need to be upfront with those actions and consequences.
Yep.
But once again, I think be honest and transparent, because that helps a productive conversation for you. And if your aim is to have a good performance review and be clear about where you're going next year and the things, perhaps blind spots that you're not aware of, if your manager can support you in uncovering those blind spots and building on those gaps that exist for you, and you may even be get some professional training, education, coaching that supports you to close some of those blind spots and gaps, which then means you can deliver more of your objectives the next year, which tends to then lead to a positive outcome. And in most organisations, they have a scoring system. So, you know, I know of a 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yep.
So anyone who gets a 4 is then put into a pot. It can be a contestability process with organisations where each manager says why their person therefore should receive the Excellence Award for the year.
Okay. Yep.
And so there's a very robust process.
Yep.
And obviously, if you receive a 1 or a 2, you probably need to reflect on where you're going in that organisation and what you can do to get yourself back into a 3. And a 4 is a star performer, a high potential employee. So you get very clear feedback in those environments. Right. Whether you're going upward, downwards or out. So it's about knowing yourself and being aware of the organisational system that you work within.
Right. And we touched on this notion of fairness, and you know, sometimes with these performance review sessions, the process or the outcomes might not be seen as entirely fair from an employee's perspective. He or she may be given a score of 2 but not necessarily agree with that score. Or certain promises made, you know, in the previous review might not have been fulfilled. You know, to what extent should employees, especially sort of early career ones who may be in their first couple of years in the workplace, push back when it comes to challenges like that?
Well, that's an interesting question. So, pushing back, if there's substance behind your claim, is probably a productive thing to do.
Okay.
Because you don't want to be stuck in a place where you can't be your best.
Yep.
And at some point you need to reconsider.
Yep.
So there might be a number of options. Sometimes they have a recourse process.
Okay.
Where you can then go and speak to HR. In a small organisation, HR probably doesn't exist.
Yep.
But in a medium-sized organisation, large organisation, often you have a performance review and a third party might be present. That might be the process.
Right.
And that keeps it fair and objective.
Yep.
But I've had examples just in the last month. Someone who received a poor performance review, after the meeting went back to the boss and said, well, do I have a future? He found out that he probably doesn't have a future, and together both the manager and that employer are working constructively on departing and finding a new job, and him being supported in that process.
Okay.
So I think that's a good outcome.
Yep.
If people can be respectful and with dignity take those steps on.
Right.
If you challenge your score and you're wrong, there's probably not much future. And that does happen, because we then go back to that idea of knowing yourself and understanding your blind spots and emotional intelligence. And if you then go and ask 5 other people and they agree with the manager,
right,
the manager's probably right.
Right.
And so probably it's a reflection that you haven't got enough feedback through the year about your current performance levels.
Yep. Okay.
So it's not black and white.
No.
It depends, and it depends on how well you know it yourself and how good that manager is in managing that process.
Right.
And the organisation.
Excellent. Okay. I've learned so much today. Thank you for your time. I'm sure our students have learned a great deal as well. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Cheers. All right.
Cheers.